Hello, everyone. My name is Derek Cameron. I work on the Oracle Code Innovate team along with Steve Nichols. Our team builds solutions to your use cases in a short, compressed 1 week time frame. We have a fun team format and we cover all the OCI services. This is all free to the customer. So check it out. There's the YouTube link. So today I'm going to be covering the installation and configuration of ORDS on version 22.1. Steve put together a great set of detailed instructions on that. And today I'll be walking through those steps. I'll provide a link for those detailed instructions on the YouTube video as a link. You'll be able to follow along after the fact yourself. There is differences between previous versions and the 22.1 version. The previous versions there was more detailed steps to follow. 22.1 is gotten somewhat simpler. There's a new ORDS executable that has a interactive prompt for the different pieces. Previously, we had to put things like connection pools in XML files and other bits and pieces. So it's a lot more streamlined now and really should only take you 15, 20 minutes at the most to actually do that deployment and configuration. The steps I'll be following today in Steve's document involve deploying a new pluggable database in DBCS. We'll deploy a compute image to host the ORDS components. We'll install and configure ORDS and APEX, and then we'll log into APEX to confirm the installation. So you might ask, well, if the APEX is available as a separate service and Autonomous Database also right in the console has APEX, why would I want to do this? Well, a lot of our customers have data in DBCS instances, and typically you install APEX into the instance that hosts all that data. And so we have a lot of, again, legacy customers that have large applications, a lot of data. They want to create applications on top of it, and it's in a DBCS instance. So that's one of the reasons why we continue to use APEX outside of now the console in APEX, the APEX console and the Autonomous Database. So let's get started. So you can follow this. I'm going to start by creating a pluggable database, and then we'll be installing APEX into that. And for the ORDS components, that's going to be done with a compute shape. Now, Steve's instructions don't actually cover these. It assumes that you've already got a database and you've already got a compute image up and running and focuses on the configuration. But if you follow along here, you'll be able to replicate everything exactly as I'm going to be doing here. So let's get started. We'll go to the database, and we're going to go to the VM. Now, remember that Autonomous Database comes with APEX, and APEX has its own service separate from that. The whole point of this configuration is to work with a bring your own license installed database on compute or DBCS service. So let's get started. I already have a database here, but I'm going to create a pluggable database on top of that. And so we'll select the database here, and we'll select pluggable database, and we'll create a pluggable database right here. And the PDB name is, I'm going to call it PDB ORDS, and I do need a TDE wallet password, create pluggable database. And while that's running, let's create our compute instance at the same time. We'll go to compute instances, and we'll create an instance. I'm going to call it compute ORDS. And I'm going to put it in my compartment. I'm going to use 83. You can use any of these, really doesn't matter. I'm going to take the default shape here. It's an Oracle Linux 8 shape. And I've already got a virtual network. I won't cover that. You do obviously need access to your compute instance. I've got a public subnet on this VCN that I've created. And then the last thing I'm going to do is go into the upload SSH keys. You do need a public key. I've got one right here. And that's it, really. I'm going to create this. The pluggable database will only take a couple of minutes to create, and the compute instance will really just take a couple of minutes to compute. And once we do that, we'll connect into the compute instance and start the configuration. Now, it'll be really handy if you have a notepad handy, because we're going to be referencing the connection link off the database. We're going to be probably copying and saving passwords. So if you have a notepad handy, that would help you kind of make it convenient so you don't have to do so much typing. So the compute shape is already started. It's got a public IP address here. Let's go back to the database. And I want to show you a couple of things. We'll go into the database itself. And then I just want to show you, we've got nodes here. So if you go into nodes, you'll actually be able to see the public IP address. And if you're starting and stopping your database, you would actually do it in nodes. If I go back to the database, and then I go back into pluggable databases, go into PDB ORDS, the first thing I'm going to have you copy is, let's go to the PDB connection. Looks like the database is still building, still creating. Okay, now it's up and running. Let's go to PDB connection. Now this is really handy. This version here is the TNS names one. We're actually going to use the Easy Connect version, and the Easy Connect version means that when we go into compute and we start configuring the ORDS connections, I don't need a TNS names. I can actually directly enter the connection here. So I'm going to copy that, and you would copy it and copy it to your notepad. And we'll copy the, we'll go back to the database details, and we'll go back into nodes, and we'll copy the IP address here as well. One more thing, we'll go back into compute, and let's copy the public IP address of the instance that we just created. And that's right here. And so there it is there, copy that. So let's SSH into the compute instance. SH -I private key, and it's OPC at, and let's get the public IP. Okay, so I'm OPC. We can start with the software installations. We'll start by installing Java, and this is just a simple yum install. The next, let's install Instant Client. And now Instant Client SQL Plus. And the next step is to install ORDS, which in reality is simply downloading. You still have to configure it. So we'll do that. The next few steps involves executing commands as Oracle. So we'll sign in as Oracle. Let's download the software. And we'll unzip the downloaded file now. So we'll need to change directories to the APEX directory. And now we need to log in as sys. So you'll need the sys user password of the pluggable database. Now you're going to be using that Easy Connect string that I suggested you copy to a notepad. And we're going to log in as SQL Plus with sys using that Easy Connect string. So I've got it in my buffer here, and it asks for the password. Now, the next step is to actually install Apex. I first want to say that if your database has previous versions, there could be a clash. I've had installs where I've had a previous 20.1 version and it was just fine. And we've recently had a customer that had 3 previous versions of Apex, and the installation seemed to go okay, but it just simply wouldn't connect when we installed and configured ORDS. So just a note of caution here. You can go and look at the deinstall process. There's some support links about that. And if you do need to deinstall it, take a look at that. Essentially, all I needed to do was remove the Apex underscore version name for each of those 3 previous versions. And after I did that, everything else seemed to work fine. So just be aware of that. So let's kick off the install. This is going to take probably 10 minutes. So I'll kick it off and then we'll hit pause, but just be aware it'll take a little while. Okay, so the installation is finished. We need to quit out of SQL Plus. And you'll notice that there's an install log there. You can cat that. And you'll see if you scroll up a little, you'll see that thank you for installing Apex 22.1. It's installed in the schema, etc. Some information. So that gives us a some feeling that it looks like the install worked well. The other thing I'll point out is that if you go into the utilities directory and then the support directory, you'll notice there's an apex verify.sql. Well, you're going to log into SQL Plus. You're going to spool the output and execute that, and you'll see a bunch of HTML streamed out to the console here, and it'll create a file, and that file will give you a lot of diagnostic information about the Apex installation. I won't run it here. You'll have to run that script, spool it to a file, and then download it because it's right now in the compute instance and you can't, I mean, you could see it, but it's formatted in HTML. So I'll show you what that looks like from a previous download of mine. So this is what it looks like when you finish that. It's got information about the database, the version compatibility. That's the registry that tells you what version is active and installed. There's other information in here. You probably don't need to take a look at that. Don't be confused and concerned that the Apex scheme itself says locked. My instance worked just fine. I've seen some inconsistencies in what ultimately comes out here, but it didn't seem to affect the actual install itself. So you can peruse this at your leisure, but there's some interesting information in here you can check out. So let's back up to the main Apex directory. And we need to log in again to SQL Plus. And now we do need to create the Apex admin user and set their password. And so there's a script to do that. And if you ever forget what it is, you can rerun this. And we'll leave the default admin. We don't need to set the admin's email address. You can if you wish. We don't need to set that. The admin's password, I'll set that. That's a new password. And so it's created user admin and it's set the password. We now have to unlock the Apex public user account, and we need to set the public user's password. And now we have to execute the APEX REST config script. Enter a new password for the APEX listener, new password. And also for the APEX, set the password for the APEX public user. Exit out of SQL Plus. Now we do need to update the bash profile to set the path for the ORDS install. So you should be Oracle, which I am still. So we'll paste that. We've edited the bash profile. And now we have a pretty key step in this whole thing, which is actually configuring ORDS with APEX. And it's an interactive prompt. Let's kick it off. And for the most part, we're going to take defaults. So we're going to take option 2 here, create a database pool and install ORDS. And for number 1, we're going to do basic name, basic connection, the host name, and you'll pick that up, your IP address. So note this is your database IP or host name. Don't be confused with the compute instance. It is 1521 for me. And the service name, pick that up from that string that should have that string, not the whole thing, but the service name component. Administrator username is sys. And then again, it's the sys password. And we'll take the defaults for the table spaces. And again, take the default here, database action enables all features. Configure and start ORDS in a standalone mode. And we'll go with HTTP. And we'll take the default port 8080. And the static resources location, I'll provide that. Hang on. So it's in the home Oracle APEX images. And this doesn't take very long, maybe about 30 seconds. So at this point, ORDS is running. If you close this window, it will stop the service. So don't log out of here. I would open, we have one more thing to do, and that is to open the firewall on the compute image. There's a separate command to start the server here. I've actually configured it, and the configuration step, install step, configures and installs, but also actually starts the server. So it does both in one command. When you stop this, you can simply close this window, but to start it again, instead of using the install, you use the, and I'll show you that, you use the serve command. So let me open a new window here. And I'm going to insert CD to the keys directory, and I'm going to SSH back in to my compute instance, and I'm going to issue open firewall commands. So I've added the port, and I've restarted the firewall to make it active. And we can see that 8080 is now open. Now at this point, we can actually log into ORDS and confirm that APEX is installed and ready to go. So the URL is simply the IP address of the compute node :8080/ORDS. And here we have the APEX login. You can log in now with the admin user ID. And remember, you set that password by running the script. So the workspace is internal. The user is admin. And the password is what you set it as. So there you have it. You've got APEX up and running. It's connecting to a database in DBCS. You should be good to go. The only other thing I was going to show you was the place to open the ports on the ingress rule with the network. I reused this network, so I didn't actually create the steps in this instructions, but if I go to networking here, virtual cloud networks, and my compartment, I've got DGC VCN, and the subnets are here, the public subnet, and then you go into add security list. So you go into the security list and you edit it. Here's my 8080 that's open. It's an ingress rule. It's simply from any source, TCP, source port range, all target port range is 8080. Remember when we went to configure ORDS, we issued the install command and it configured the ORDS server and also started the server. Well, when you are done that and you want to restart the server after configuration, you don't use the install command. You use the serve command. So it's the same path, ORDS config, etc ORDS config, and then it was serve or it was install, and then just to start it, it's now serve. So the server starts same as before, but you don't have to go through the, obviously don't need to configure it every time. So I hope you found this helpful and good luck.